did they get there? What do they do for work? What did they do for work? What mistakes did they make? What advice do they give? And just about their story. So if you've read the book Millionaire Next Door, it's similar to that. Just a little bit on steroids and a different person every week. And normally it's somebody you'd never heard of. So that's just the quick synopsis.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I stumbled across your podcast. I forget even how. No, you know what, Justin? I think it was, why am I blanking on his name right now that we had on the podcast? Lowe. It was Lowe. I think Lowe's the one that pointed me to your podcast. One of Justin and I's friends that we had on the podcast. Nice. And I started listening, and it was great stuff. And then I reached out, and I was have you guys released that podcast?
No, I don't think we released yours yet.
Yeah, so I'm on the podcast. So they do interview people you've never heard of before. So that's proof. But it was a great time. I love the structure of the podcast, and I've always learned something after listening. So it's a good podcast if you haven't checked it out.
You're one of the few that we didn't change your name for, so you know. Most people no one's ever heard of because we changed the names, you know. You got to conceal the identity for the rich, right?
Is that usually the guest request? They'll ask that you do that. Do you guys just offer it?
Yeah, we offer it. It's probably like, I don't know, I'd say like 30 or 40% take us up on just change the name. We try to, you only use first names anyway. Sometimes these people like never discuss this ever. And then they come on a podcast and discuss it. And so they kind of, for their friends or whoever might run into it, they just want to change names. We did have one guest a while back that we tried to conceal their identity, and then she wrote us in and was like, my friends listen to your podcast and I had no idea and they knew my voice. So she busted it pretty good.
Just start doing like screening of the voices. Like, then,
put a real twist on it.
Yeah, that's funny. It's so, I think that's why I love your guys' topics, because it's so taboo to talk about those things. But this is a platform for those people that do want to talk about it. And it is valuable advice, because I'm well under that mark, but that's kind of where I want to be or want to get to within the next few years. So kind of hearing those insights from people that have done it before, I think is invaluable. So I appreciate you guys kind of putting that out there for us.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we get into interesting topics too that a lot of people face in their lifetime, but like you said, it's taboo. Nobody talks about, they don't talk about an estate plan or, inheritance from a death of a parent that came earlier than they expected, or, just the planning around, even just unclaimed property. I mean, a lot of people just don't even know that the states are holding, I think Texas right now is holding like $3 billion in unclaimed property. And how do you go claim that kind of stuff? And just all these different things that relate to each one of our financial life. But a lot of times it's, if you want to learn something, you want to learn to be skinny, you go talk to people that are skinny and are in shape. You go talk to people that are rich and manage money well. Go talk to millionaires. Well, how do we talk to millionaires? It's hard. I mean, nobody runs around like saying, hey, man, I'm worth $5 million. Let me tell you how I did it. Right?
Right. You can't go on LinkedIn and be like, well, I'd like to learn how you built this portfolio. But those people don't necessarily list those things on LinkedIn, so I could reach out to them.
Yeah. So on the sort of the topic of you talking to a bunch of different millionaires, what have you guys taken away as like some of the biggest commonalities?
Yeah, I think Clark and I get asked this question a lot, and I think there's several things that stick out. One is definitely the intentionality that these millionaires do. I mean, it's something that, whether it's investing or building a business or building their career, they're very intentional with it. And they do it, consistently over time. It's, hey, I did this for 1 year and I got the result. I think the other thing too, one thing that we always tell people we're super shocked by, and I think in the financial world, a lot of people, first thing to do is, you got to get on a budget, you got to budget, or you do this. And everybody hates the dreaded B word in a lot of ways. And what we've found is most of our millionaires do not budget. Which is really ironic, given that a lot of the financial advice out there is budget. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't go to say that they're not aware of their spending. They all are, but most of them are not sitting there month over month saying, "Hey, I'm only spending $1,000 on food this month, and I'm not going over." It's more of just let me be aware of my spending and make sure that I'm within reason, but they're not sitting down month over month, budgeting.
Why do you think that is?
We've asked several of them, why, and some of them may have been on a budget at one point in their life for like a, hot second, but I think it's just tedious. It's hard. It's not something that is a glorifying exercise to do. And it takes a lot of time and stress if you're sitting there thinking, oh man, I got, $20 left in this budget for like eating out, and I plan to pay utilities, and like, I'll just take 20 from there and move 20 there or whatever it might be. And it just, it's tedious to do that all the time versus like, we have expenses in our lives that are just not, I mean, for example, here in Texas, my electric bill is way higher in the summer than it is in the winter. And so, but that's very unpredictable bill. I mean, I kind of know, but if I were to sit down and be like, all right, I'm only doing this much for electric, and then it's over that, and then I got to go take some from another category or whatever. And same thing with food. I mean, especially I got a couple of kids. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy. I mean, I don't know exactly on all the millionaires how they approach it, but it's definitely one of those things that I think is just too tedious for a lot of them to sit down and just, hey, I'm going to be aware of my spending, but I'm not going to sit there and cry over spilled milk or worry about the pennies in one category versus another.
Mm-hmm. I think we catch them too at the end a little bit, or at least when they've reached a goal. So I think if we were to ask, have you ever budgeted tightly? Mm-hmm. I think the answer would probably be yes. I would assume that, 75% of them at some point did do that. I think the question is, we often ask is, do you live on a budget now? And it's no. So I think when someone has a net worth of $2 million, they feel less inclined to do that. Whereas maybe 15 years ago when they had 100,000, they felt like, all right, I'm going to work a little bit at it to get there. So I think that's a piece of it too.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Whereas me, I'm like, right now I'm strict with the budget just because I feel like I got to make sure, like, it's almost like I only budget so that I can make sure that I can save more so that I can get to that point. But I kind of see what you're talking about. Yeah, it's kind of like, I see what you're talking about, where they get to a point where they feel like it's kind of automated. They kind of have an idea in their head of what they're already spending. But I guess the income is so high at that point that they're just like, I know I'm saving. I know I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, and some of them too, in your situation, or are still doing that. It's just that they're pouring all that income out to invest or do whatever they want, and then they just live on the rest. So in a way, they're budgeting, but it takes it out of the equation for them. All that money is gone before it even, they see it, gone to all the different accounts, because it is so easy to automate a lot of what we do today that by the end of, paycheck or whatever they're looking at, or, distributions from businesses or whatever, it's, all right, this is what I have to spend.
Right. I think on the topic of millionaires, there's game shows, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? There's movies. Like, why do you think it's important to be a millionaire in today's society?
Well, I think another question to ask along that line is $1 million now what it was 15 years ago? I think millionaire is a buzzword. And I think you can certainly do it. I mean, in personal finance, it's often talked about the 4% withdrawal rate, right? If you have $1 million, you withdraw 4% a year. So I think it's very possible that somebody could live off of $40,000 a year. So to me, I think it provides a bottom line, right? A cushion of retirement. I mean, I guess some people retire and aren't millionaires and live off Social Security. So it's not a must, but I think it's kind of the base limit of financial security, at least for retirement, if you spend 40 grand a year or less.
That, I have this example when we were trying to buy a piece of property out of a very wealthy man's portfolio, and he forgot he owned it, but we offered him $1 million, and we actually ended up not purchasing it for a few different reasons. But going back to like $1 million is still a lot of money. This individual is still very wealthy, and $1 million on, offer on that property caught his attention. Granted, he didn't know that he even owned it. So it's kind of like, well, I just found $1 million, we didn't end up closing on him. I don't know if he sold it to somebody else, but I think at the end of the day, like, no matter who you are, $1 million still buys quite a bit, no matter what. And so, getting to that And it's not easy to get to that point. I mean, for the most part, I'd say the average of all our millionaires, it's taken them 7 to 15 plus years on average, and which is a wide range. It just depends on kind of when they started, but some kind of say, well, I started my career, but I didn't really start investing until I was, 30 or something. That took me 10 years after that. But really roughly, most of them are probably hitting that first million in their late 30s, early 40s for the most part, which is, it's still a substantial number, and it still takes time. It's not something that, like Clark said, 15 years ago, I think that needle has moved for what a lot of people would consider financial independence. I think back in the day, maybe $1 million was, hey, I could retire on that no matter what. People thought, I don't think as many people feel that way today, but there's definitely people that do, and that definitely can retire on that and feel comfortable.
What are your financial goals?
Say it again. Sorry, you cut out, at least for me.
Yeah, sorry. What are your financial goals? Is your target $1 million? Is it something else? Is it not even money related?
Yeah. So I think, I'll speak for me. Jace can speak for him. I think at least for both of us, though, as we've done these interviews and interviewed these millionaires, let's let me back up. That's a question we always ask: is do you have a passive income goal or a net worth goal? Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, at least for me, it's been surprising. Most of them don't. So most of them, there's not really like hey, I'm at $1 million, I want to get to 5. It's very like, oh, I'm going to come up with it since you guys asked me the question, right? Okay, I have $1 million net worth. Yeah, maybe like 3. Like, yeah, 3 would be pretty cool, So let me just add that was surprising to us. I think, at least to me, that there's been very few people that they're like, this is where I'm at, and this is exactly where I want to get to net worth wise. So just interesting. For me, anyway, along with that, as we've heard those answers and had these conversations, I think it's shifted to passive income and less so net worth. I think net worth drives the passive income, and that's the goal, right? Even if it's all in stocks or whatever, you're going to be living off cash flow. So that's the goal for me, is cash flow. And I think Jason and I both done this. Jace told me about this. I don't know where you heard about this. You did it first, but he just said, write down your dream budget, right? Like if you could do whatever you wanted to do when you had 3 or 4 kids or whatever, right? And you were 50 years old and your kids were married, like anything you wanted to do, however many vacations, however many country clubs, like anything crazy, however often you want to buy a new car, like what would be your number? And like, that's become the goal. So I think for Jason, I was like, what, $200,000 or $300,000 is like, I could do whatever I wanted, right? If I had that much coming in, I could do whatever I wanted, right? After taxes. So of course that raises it up, but that's kind of the goal for me now, is working at that. How do you get to that point?
That's assuming everything was paid off too. So, no right. mortgages on your home or homes. It was basically like what, and I've done this exercise a couple of times with my wife, and to be honest, I don't know if I just came out of thin air or whatever, but that's kind of where I've gone to. And I always have, personally pegged in a short term, getting to 10 million. But like Clark said, it's more about getting to that cash flow. And it's just, marking net worth is just one way to keep score. Marking passive income is another way to keep score, or income in general, no matter how you look at it. If it's quote unquote, I think passive income is another buzzword that we throw around a lot, but having some sort of income that is somewhat reliable, that is not necessarily tied to your time, is really, what we're really getting at. And sometimes that could be just withdrawing from a portfolio that is stock, or it could be real estate, or, some sort of business or whatever. But getting to that mark, that $300,000 to $400,000 would give me personally the lifestyle of like, taking the family on a bunch of vacations, having the cars that I want, being able to, play golf, go boating, do all those kinds of things. No problem.
That sounds very familiar. I kind of took a similar approach. And actually ended up with very similar numbers, like anywhere from 250 to 400,000, anywhere from like I looked at it as having maybe 6 to 12 million invested in the market and then withdrawing that 4%, but in some ballpark, anywhere from 250 to 400,000 a year.
Yeah. Yep. So, along with that, we've interviewed over, I mean, we got 170 episodes released now, recording this end of January, but I think we've got another bunch in the pipeline. So over 200 millionaires. And one thing that stood out is they all value flexibility and freedom more than ever. And now where they feel like they're financially secure, at least to an extent that they're comfortable with, it's like, I want time. I want time to be able to do what I want. I want to be able to go do what I want, when I want, with who I want. And so I think that's also what cemented that passive income or that cash flow is that's the goal. You know, I don't want to be working till I'm 60 at a job on Monday mornings that I don't want to be at, you know. I don't really want to be doing that when I'm 40.
Yep.
But so as we've talked to people, I mean, that's one huge commonality that they all have is that's where they want to get to. They want flexibility and freedom.
Yeah, definitely. What is both of yours best or favorite strategy for passive income right now?
So I personally deploy a 3-bucket strategy across everything. And we always have, at least recently, been asking our millionaires, like, okay, how do you flow your dollars as they come in? And so the approach I've taken, and this is starting to change just a little bit, and I'll explain why, but basically I look at it, a third of it is going for long-term retirement type, tax protected or tax advantaged accounts. A third of it is going into real estate, and a third of it, and that's primarily cash flowing real estate, and a third of it is going into business ventures. And I try to structure my net worth roughly like that. But as I've gotten a little bit older, that's starting to get skewed a little more on the business. Just one, I enjoy business, and two, it's much easier to develop and create wealth and cash flow from business in a lot of ways. And so I'll typically deploy that back into real estate and or business, just depending on what comes available. But I've been investing personally in the markets for, gosh, it's been a long time, like almost 20 years since I was a teenager. And so that 1/3 bucket, I just kind of feel like for the most part for me is set. And so I really don't put that much money into the markets at this point, unless I'm going to, hey, I'm going to really double down on a Tesla stock or something like that I really believe in. But in terms of like putting it in a tax protected account, 401k or IRA or whatever, what have you, like I personally feel like I'm kind of, when I do the math in a calculator, it's like, okay, adding that extra amount of dollars this year isn't really going to move the needle when I'm 65 or 60. And so I'm just not going to do it. It's kind of the way I look at it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, similar. I mean, Jay's a few years ahead of me. Real estate's really amazing, like, and I bet you 75% of the millionaires we interviewed have some sort of rental property or real estate. Did you say, Jay, 75%, 70% maybe? Certainly there's some that say, hey, I don't.
Yeah. Really, I mean, most of them have a primary residence for sure.
Yeah. Outside the primary, I'd say 65, 70% have some sort of investment or rental property. I mean, you start thinking about it. It's like, okay, if you got a mortgage payment at this $1,000, something rents for $1,500, okay, you got utilities and taxes, whatever. Simple math. If you can cash flow $300 a month, I mean, $400 or $500 of that $1,000 mortgage payment is going to go to principal. So it's just, I mean, if you can get a good solid property with a good renter, it's just amazing how fast it can grow. And we've had people write in that say, gosh, stop getting so many people that are invested in real estate. Like, I don't want to hear as much real estate. It's like, we don't go to these people and say like, hey, you can only come on the show if you're invested in real estate. So that it's just a commonality that's come, a lot of them are real estate investors that grow their net worth quickly and especially become millionaires at a young age.
Yeah. I mean, we're both starting to get into real estate. We have our second property now. We're trying to find a tenant for that. So anyone listening from Florida that wants a property,
we might have one available.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you guys know, and anyone that does listen to this podcast knows my background is in software tech companies, but real estate's just like, it's just an obvious place to put money, let it grow. I think if you do the numbers and you're willing to put in the work to manage the thing, it's much better than the market and a lot more reliable.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing we found as we tried to buy bigger stuff is it's hard to find a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest thing about it. Once you can get that, it's pretty seamless.
Yep. Yeah, we spent a lot of time just looking at properties and running numbers, and we got lucky. Our second property was actually just the house literally next door to our first one, so it was identical.
Oh, wow.
So it was very convenient for us, so we didn't have to do that again. But
And
yeah,
how'd you know it came up for sale? You got notified or same broker or something?
Yeah, so I have my dad. He does all the handyman type stuff there down in Florida.
Oh, cool.
Because I'm buying 10 minutes away from where I grew up. And he happened to see the neighbor next door, and it was the neighbor's mom that was living there. He was moving her to a nursing home and was going to sell it. So we knew before it popped on the market. So we were first offer in. So it was convenient.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to pay for it was a different story, but
no, it's easier, right? You have two next door to each other. It makes it a lot. And then does your dad manage it, or you hire a management company?
I do most of the management, and then he does any of the in-person stuff.
Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, we were gonna hire a management company, but honestly, we just weren't too stoked about any of them. I think one of the biggest things for me in our management company is the renter's experience has to be really good, right? It's a service business. Most of the property management companies we talk to were so investor focused. Honestly, I don't care if you're really customer service focused. For me, I want my tenants to be so happy that they never want to leave. And that's something that I think that we could offer more of. Also, Justin and I's background in software and technology, I think we'll end up building software and automating a lot of the pieces that we have. But
cool.
So
yeah, Trey ends up building spreadsheets or tools to help us do all this stuff.
All good software starts as a spreadsheet. I'm very convinced of that.
We joke. We call it Trey sheets at some point.
I make a spreadsheet.
This is no longer just some template that you found online. You found ways to scrape and pull data.
They're always they're never good enough. No, I
sell your templates, man.
Yeah, there you go.
So one question I have is, what is one of the weirdest things that you've heard, or the most out there thing that you've heard?
That's a good question. We've had some guys that I'll just kind of give two that come to my mind. I don't know if they're weird or just different, maybe is the better word for me. But there's been a few guys that are super into precious metals, right? Guys that come on that they're like, I don't believe anything in the market. And they have $250,000 in silver bars in a safe somewhere in a safety deposit box, or something. So that's interesting to me just because it's so different than anything I do or anything that I really grew up around my father doing or anybody else that I knew. That much money, that's right? Crazy. Okay, if you want to go buy a gold bar for fun, sure, that's cool. But, $200,000 in it, you're like, wow, that's a lot of money. When you got a net worth of 1.2 or something, 1.5. Yeah. One of the more fun stories we've heard that has stood out to me is a guy that he was a millionaire. He went to Vegas. He went gambling. He won a bunch of money at the casino and then walked over to the Rolex shop across the street and bought a Rolex. I don't remember how much he spent, but we don't hear
too many. I think it's 10 grand.
Yeah, there's just not too many of hey, I'm just gonna go binge purchase that or splurge. Most of the millionaires are frugal, right? That's kind of how they got there for the most part. Of course, there's some that are spenders, but for the most part, they're pretty frugal. So that's just a couple that stood out to me. Go ahead, Jace.
Yeah, I always think of the Rolex just because the guy's a character for one, but two, it just, the way he tells that story, it just, he's like, look, I've been frugal my whole life. I got a bunch of money randomly. When else am I going to have this experience? And it wasn't just about buying the Rolex. It was kind of that whole experience that he was able to kind of create that, it cost him 10 grand or 7 grand or whatever that Submariner cost at the time. But he has that with him forever, that high, that experience to kind of draw back on. And of course he can, wear the watch and, whatnot. But, as you were asking this question, I was trying to think through just, odd things. And, we don't have anybody come on yet that, is got a 200 gun collection or, some of these odd things that you would think that might come up or, I just, in general, I think probably, we had an early episode with a millionaire who had made all of his money in a tech startup and then lost it all. And so essentially he was a former millionaire. We brought on the show to kind of talk about the roller coaster that he had done. And that's just very atypical for most of the ones that we've had on, but it's definitely something that happens in this country where people take big risks and potentially make it all in one and lose it all in another, or make it all again. In terms of just being completely odd, I haven't found anybody that's invested in like rugs or art or any of that stuff, but I know people do.
Yeah.
Heck, the IRS, says you can't self-direct into rugs. So
really,
obviously people are investing.
That's crazy.
I never would have thought that as an investment vehicle.
I am writing that down. I want to research that more. That's fascinating.
We just interviewed a guy last week. This hasn't launched yet, but we interviewed a guy last week that invested $200,000 in Tesla before it all went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then right before some earnings release, he sold half of it because he's like, okay, this is getting up there. So he sold $100,000 of it. Anyway, so then he kept his $100,000 in, and now it's worth $2.5 million. So
wow.
It was worth, and that's, you hear the stories, right? You read about them on Business Insider or CNBC, like, oh, this guy became a millionaire and he bought all his kids' Teslas. But that was the first one, like, where we've talked to, and it's like, well, what do you do now, man? How long are you holding this thing? And anyway, that just another interesting story that stood out.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I have one question that is very selfish because I'm in the process of trying to figure out more estate planning stuff. And you mentioned that earlier, that's something that you've talked to a lot of millionaires and they've been thinking about or figuring out. Like, what are some of the biggest things you've taken away in terms of estate planning that a lot of people maybe don't think about?
Yeah, so we just had an interview with an individual, and he was extremely raw. His father had passed away unexpectedly and had a medical practice, and overnight became, essentially an owner of a medical practice. Had to figure out how to unwind that, sell that. Obviously, a license to practice, so he and his brother needed to split that. But it's always talked about. I think that there's just not a lot of people out there that put wills together or don't update them. I think that's one thing that just in general, our millionaires are not great at. We talk about it, and a lot of them, oh yeah, it's something I got to do. It's on the list. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't do it. And it can complicate things when people die, but even more so is making sure beneficiaries are updated in all accounts. If you've got, brokerage accounts or retirement accounts, it's very easy to do that. At least update those beneficiaries. In terms of putting together an actual estate plan, for a lot of them, it's probably not something that they need to do, at least until they've kind of gotten a little older, gotten a little bit more significant wealth, just because, I guess we have had a few that have had, significant properties or business holdings, and obviously those and how those are going to get divested and everything. But some of the ones we've had on that are up there in that wealth, and I know David for sure. He's got a very extensive estate plan. Everybody's well aware, how it's going to work and all that kind of stuff. But he's worth $100 million, so he can go pay for that and make sure and take the time. But I think not having the conversations, we've had some that have come on and like, oh yeah, I didn't know, what was going to happen, and this happened, and then of course there were family feuds. And I think the other thing too, just with the estate planning that we've learned, is make sure you keep really good records. The gentleman that came on, that his father passed, his father had kept such good records that they were able to recover and uncover every single thing, and even had his stepmom, I think it was a stepmom, or maybe it was his mom, that they had been divorced or something. She was the only one on an account, and it was several $100,000, but because of all these records, they were able to track this account down. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the mom was willing to go ahead and sign over. But that's the kind of thing that would have ended up in the state's hands in unclaimed property, which is another thing, to make sure that, I just looked the other day randomly for myself, and I look every year, just it's part of my annual routine. And so as January is like, I'm gonna go get on there and look, and then there was something that was from AT&T that was like 3 years ago or whatever that finally got turned over to the state somehow. And it wasn't very much money, but as I was looking through some other names around mine, I mean, there's, 5-figure and 6-figure sums, for other people that had been sitting there for somebody's estate that nobody had collected on.
Wow. That's crazy.
I think you'd be surprised. I was surprised at how many people don't know what they're going to do with their money when they do pass away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a question we ask, like, well, where's it going? Is it going to kids? Is it going to charity? Is you going to spend it all? Like, what are you doing with it all? You got $3 million. What if you die? Where's it going? 95% of them don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's always a bad thing. I think maybe that's always a work in progress. I think the 5% that have known admit that, right? Like, hey, here's where it's going right now, but I don't know. That's a work in progress. But I mean, I'd say 80% of them are like, I don't know. Like, yeah, we're just starting to have those conversations, and it's a little easier if you're married, but who knows? I mean, what if you're on a date with your spouse and you get killed in a car accident or something? I mean, where does it go? And you don't have kids or something. So most of them don't talk about it.
Yeah. And they're hard questions to ponder and theorize around. And then there's...
It's not a fun topic.
It's not a fun topic. And even like thinking about like child's savings, right? There's like 529Bs, but then like, what's your view on college, and are they going to go to college? And there's so many different things, and there's not a ton of great resources on these topics. The Wealth Management Index is probably the best book that I've read that touched on these things, that really got me thinking about it. But other than that, like, I haven't seen a whole lot of great resources.
What does that say? I haven't heard of that one.
The Wealth Management Index. So it's, I forget who wrote it. I have it around here somewhere, but he was a financial advisor, or one of those. He ran a firm, and he basically boiled all of the wealth management down to a single index. So this book goes through all the various parts of that index, how they're scored, and goes into detail about like what's good, what's bad, and all of those things. So it's a really good, like, pretty in-depth view of every single side of wealth management. There's estate planning, there's asset protection, there's like the investing side, which is the side that really everyone looks at. It's the place where I learned about how to use credit lines to balance cash flow, and all the various types of credit lines you can even have. And it was a very interesting book, but it's really for financial nerds. It's fairly in depth.
I'll check it out. Thanks.
How do you guys usually prepare for your podcast? Like, what's the pre-podcast routine for you guys? Now that you're
if we're somebody that we're going to interview?
Yeah.
Got to get that Michael Jordan steak down first.
Because you guys are fairly experienced at this.
So we'll send them. We have a list of questions that's just like pre-populated. And we don't get to them all always in the interview. I think we sent them to you, Trey. Maybe we didn't even get to half. I don't know. I mean, very similar, very like, hey, what's your allocation? What are your goals? Have you ever used a financial advisor? And I think it's good just to get them thinking of like, hey, these are the type of questions that are going to be asked. And so we'll send that to them. It's about 15 questions long, just a PDF. We're changing it a little bit. We're going to have them start filling out just like a basic summary, just so we can be a little bit more prepared. A lot of the millionaires that we interview send us like insanely detailed spreadsheets, right? Of like, hey, I've been tracking my net worth for 15 years in this Excel. Like, here it is. And so usually that helps, I think, with the interview, is when we have a baseline of what to go in off of, and then we can customize the questions a little bit more to their story. But normally it's just that. We just send the questions. We'll explain the process and try and understand their story as best as we can, and then go from there. And then normally we'll chat for 10 minutes or so before the recording, just to make sure we get everything.
Yeah, much more structured than ours.
We figured it out along the way, man. Our early ones was like, it was.
It's what you get after doing it.
20 questions. Yeah,
it's what you get after doing it for 3 years and spending hours and hours. And then we get better and better at it too, as we start to get questions from listeners that write in, and we start to understand like what our listeners really wanting. I think initially Clark and I started it, one, to dive into some of these allocations because, quite frankly, the only ones we'd ever looked at were our parents. And then, two, to kind of tell the stories because the stories are fairly unique. Everyone has a little bit different journey, a little bit different mindset, risk tolerance is different. And so being able to craft a story, coupled with to explain, one thinks about their allocation and puts their allocation together and how that shaped who they are and where they're headed. It takes each one kind of takes a life of its own, and trying to understand how our listener thinks about it and putting that all together. That's why we end up doing the questions we do. That's why we end up having the 10-minute conversation beforehand. A lot of times stuff comes out in that conversation that, wasn't going to get put on paper in one way or another. And a lot of times too, these millionaires are like, oh, my story's the same. Like, I mean, it's the same thing. Everybody, they think they're all the same, but it's really not. I mean, a lot of people have different journeys, even if they just contributed to a 401k, there's missteps they might've made or things they learned along the way that, especially depending on their profession, because a lot of people resonate with people that they can relate to. So if somebody's the same profession, they look at what this person's done and like, oh, that's what I was thinking, man, that's why I was making, I can do this, and they kind of get some confidence built up or whatever, or what have you. And so we just try to craft that together and put that together as best we can.
Yep. That makes sense. And what do you guys do for, day jobs or earned income?
I'm a CFO at a building materials company is what I spend most of my time doing. And then I've got a franchise business and some other real estate and stuff that I spend time doing too, but I spend most of my time as a CFO at a building materials company.
That sounds like it takes up a lot of time.
Yeah. I got a great team though.
I just help with the accounting and finance for a small real estate company.
Oh, nice. Okay. So yeah, I guess
not that small. He's modest.
Yeah, that sounds modest.
Several $100 million.
It's a good flex, Clark.
Not a flex. It's small in New York.
Yeah. Trey, you got any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
Good?
What's the best place for people to find your podcast, to reach out if they have any other follow-up questions or want to check out some of your content?
Yeah, thanks. So Millionaires Unveiled is the podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, whatever. And then millionairesunveiled.com. And then our email is millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. So
awesome.
That's us. Yep. Episode 171 coming up here this week.
Cool. Awesome.
Great. So thanks for coming on. Yeah.
Clark, no, Chase, thank you. This was fun. It's good to connect with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Seems like we're all about the same age, so it's fun.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Well, that is it for our first podcast of 2021. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll probably see you next week, maybe.
For all of our listeners.
Hey, Lo was on here. So.
Oh, did he comment?
Yeah, he joined. One person watched, so there we go. All right.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone.